Internet animation has been a thing on the internet for a long while, basically for the last decade or two, and if you've been active in the internet for that amount of time, which you likely have, you've dabbled in these before. Now, a lot of my experiences with internet animation was mostly parody animations based on what I was into at the time, like the 2010s, which was basically a lot of stuff. But as time has passed, a lot more original internet animation has been popping up, and I haven't really gone on my way to watch a lot of these, but it's nice to see independent animation thrive. So, RWBY, it's spelled RWBY, but I'm just gonna call it RWBY, is a show that comes from the late and great Monty Ohm. And to keep it brief, he was basically a really good animator who mainly animated fight scenes, but he did also animate a couple dance scenes, but mainly fight scenes. At least that's what I know him for. And I remember watching his stuff scattered around YouTube a lot when I was younger. I would put on Haloid with a bowl of cereal at 1 a.m. and that was living the life to me. Still probably is. Anyways, RWBY was Monty's fight scenes, but it was fully original. It had a world and it had a story, and that's the short version, because if I tried to describe what the show really was, we'd be here for at least an hour, and I'm also not doing all that. But if you want a really short summary, it's basically about 4 girls becoming anime warriors in your typical anime world in anime school, until it isn't. But yeah, the show had a lot of eyes on it, and given that there's a 10th season on the way as of writing and speaking the script, it sure did. Now, I don't really have any experience watching this show because it just completely flew over my head as it was coming out, which is weird because something like this would totally appeal to me, especially when I was 12 or 13, but I was probably too deep into the Undertale rabbit hole to care, so oops. Well, there's no time like the present, so I'm going to sit down and watch the first 3 seasons to see how it... Anyways, given that the show really blew up, you bet it meant a bunch of stuff like an anime, a direct-to-DVD crossover with DC out of all things, and video games, because of course. And also Dead Battle because, it was my exposure to RWBY for the longest time. I remember watching Yang vs Tifa when it came out and just skipping straight to the fight without knowing or caring about any of those 2 characters because I was 12 and also that's just how I operate. Don't look at me like that. But going back to the video games part, this series actually ended up getting 2 of those. There's also the weird mobile games that are now delisted, but who really remembers those? You don't count. Anyways, the one I'm looking today is RWBY Arrowfell, which was released in 2022 and developed by WayForward. Yeah, that WayForward, the guys who made Shantae, Mighty Switch Force, Bakugan Battle for Vestoria. They're a good developer, but sometimes you can tell from their output they just really need that paycheck, and I'm gonna be real, this game definitely feels like one of those cases. And I didn't even think about ever reviewing this game or talking about the show in some capacity on this channel, but one of my friends gifted me this game on Steam requesting a review, and I caved. God, I am a simple bitch. It wouldn't really be a video from me if I didn't bitch about the story, so here you go. Who would have thought that a game based on a show with bad writing would also have bad writing? See, the problem with this game is that it's not only canon to the show, which is already kind of a limiter in my opinion, but it also takes place during the 7th season of the show. Which yeah, you can do that, but then it means you're gonna have to explain the entire show up to the point for people like me who are not watching all that. So, how does the game exactly handle this? It dumps a paragraph of text that barely explains anything, and then it just moves on. Now, I know it probably would have taken, it definitely would have taken a lot of resources to actually animate 7 seasons worth of content into a simple introduction, but you could have just I don't know, reused clips from the show and add some narration to it. It would still be lame, but it's much better than this. But even that wonderful opening aside, the story is just so generic. It's basically just the team minding their own business, trouble arises, you meet this guy who's totally not the villain, a bunch of other bad guys, etc, beat him to save the day. Sure, there's more to the story than I'm really saying, but does that really matter when it just doesn't interest me at all? There's this other team that shows up early on, and you'd think they'd be a big deal with how much emphasis is placed on them by the end of the first chapter, but no, you just fight them once, you talk to them once, and then they fuck off from the rest of the story, never to be seen again. Which is pretty much the case for almost every character here in this game. You barely get to even know them, and then before you know it, you're never seeing them again. Goodbye. I'm not asking for some deep world building or lore or whatever from this game, but it's generally baffling how I'll meet a character one time and they just never appear again. And this really hurts the characters that are exclusive to this game, because I feel like when you make characters exclusively for a game, you want to put emphasis on them, so why? And I'm not saying every character needs a spotlight, but forgetting about most of them definitely makes the world feel small. Another issue I have is that the dialogue in this game is just really childish. Aside from the fact that I have nothing to say about the characters, the way they often speak just comes off as really patronizing, especially during the dialogue when someone gives you a quest.
But what I would love is to celebrate today's success with a nice cold grape soda.
To be fair, at least the tone remains this way and it doesn't randomly decide to bring up a plot point about racism with a character with the cat ears or whatever, because yes, that actually happens in the show, I'm not kidding. But regardless, the story and writing here is very much just a what you see, what you get kind of deal. It gets the job done, but like, this is just nothing. And even then, the story literally just ends when you think things are about to ramp up, which I'll get to that later, believe me. And to top it all off, the game ends on that one Minecraft story mode scene. Wonderful. I generally don't know where to begin with the gameplay, so for once, let's start with the positives actually. This game actually controls really nicely. The characters feel pretty responsive. Hell, I'd say it's pretty fun to platform in this game sometimes with how tight the controls are. Yep, that's where the positives end. Okay, so the first problem I have with this game is that I don't know what it's trying to be, as if the Yakuza-ass tile cards per chapter wasn't confusing enough. But like, if you look at this gameplay right now, you might think it's something akin to Metroid, but no, it really isn't. I'm not really a fan of that genre, so I'll probably butcher my explanation here, but this game doesn't really feel like you're meant to explore these areas, but more like that these are just a bunch of mazes. Every area in this game plays the damn same. You're forced to talk to some characters, a bunch of areas open in the map, and then you go to the ones with the exclamation point and basically roam around to complete the objective, which is usually always the same damn thing, just grab the thing. Sometimes they'll change it up to finding a person, but it's still like grab the thing. Grab the person does have a funny ring to it, but yeah. Oh, and to make things even worse, there's absolutely no map system in this game, so you're basically going to have to guess and memorize the map layout to know where to go. How fun. Speaking of the map layout, this level design is just a bunch of nothing, man. I did say the game felt fun to control, but it's not gonna really do much for your game if your levels aren't fun. Like the rest of the game is just the same thing over and over. Areas with some platforming and enemies, and these ambush sections that are goddamn everywhere. I mean it. You see, sometimes this game will just like, you'll be exploring an area, but then you'll be locked into this arena with like a couple of floating platforms where the goal is to basically just kill everything until the game says, okay, you can go. The problem with these is that these rooms are not only really boring and get old fast because there's like 3 enemy types or some shit, but the game just spams them constantly, especially in the latter half of the game. And because there isn't really a map system, there are plenty of moments where you'll enter an ambush and end up wasting time rather than making progress. And the health system. Dear God, the health system. It's not like it doesn't work, but it's just so confusing. Like, you have these hearts in the health bar, but the health bar is more of a shield, and like once it's empty, any hit you take remove a heart. You can also increase the amount of hearts you have by buying more from shop, and you can also regenerate the health bar easily, more so if you upgrade it, but like, why? Why make this new system in the first place? Games have figured out HP bars since like the goddamn 80s, so what's their excuse? So it was more faithful to the show? Bro, who cares? Moving on though, the game does try to spice things up in terms of gameplay in the form of semblances. So in the show, most of the characters have some sort of power that awakens in them after some sort of training or whatever, and like, I don't know for sure, but standard anime ass stuff, close enough. Anyways, in this game you can take control of each one of Team RWBY, and each member has a special action you can trigger with the triangle button, or whatever the equivalent is that for your controller, whatever. You can switch into any team member at any time, which is neat, but the game really ruins this by using these powers as an excuse to force you to use certain characters. There are so many times in this game where I'll just be playing as one character, but then force me to switch to another character to solve a simple puzzle. While switching characters is snappy, it doesn't make it any less annoying, especially because this feels like a cheap way to justify the gimmick. Literally gave me Ben 10 game on the DS vibes, and I don't mean that as a compliment. I honestly would have preferred this game just had me pick only one character at the start, and the level design just focuses on accommodating for every character. But, you know, whatever. Don't be a good game, I guess. This game also has a skill point system because, yeah, skill trees, why not? You can basically buy these from shops and find them throughout the game and use them to make the character of your choice stronger. Now, people with a brain would split the skill points evenly across all characters, but I'm not people with a brain, so I just put all my points into characters I only really cared about, which was Blake and Ruby for reasons, but mainly because they made the entire game a total cakewalk once you maxed out at least one character. The game is just very generous with skill points, so I don't even know why the system exists, but whatever, it just feels pointless. And speaking of pointless, the hubs, because oh man, the hubs. Does this game love making you go here? I mentioned earlier how the game constantly makes you visit these to unlock an area, and it's exactly as annoying as it sounds. Because if it was like actual hub worlds, I'd at least get it, but these hubs consist of a straight line with a bunch of reused NPCs that are randomly just placed throughout, and they're also reused very cheaply, so you know, more padding I guess. But why though? Like, why do I need to do this to unlock an area? Just do it instantly for me on the map, you know? God damn it. Anyways, lastly, we have the boss fights, which, you know, they're bad. Shocker. Not in the sense that they're hard, but in the sense that they're really repetitive and drag on for like way too long. Seriously, every boss in the game only has like 3 attacks, and they're all absolute health sponges, but you can easily cheese these fights. Like, look at me, I don't give a shit right now. I'm just tapping the goddamn square button. Yay. But like, my point is that I shouldn't have to resort to be doing this for your bosses, you know? And it's even worse in the final boss because it's like the most polarizing thing ever. Because I thought it was like the special mid-game boss with multiple phases or whatever, but no. After like the 3rd phase, which is, you know, barely any different from the 1st phase, he just gets dragged away and the game rolls the credits. Like, yeah, I was happy I could stop playing this game, but at the same time, like, really? It just ends? That's it? Even licensed games have more of an ending than this. At least I think. So graphically, this game looks fine. For starters, I think the backgrounds and environments are actually really pretty, I'm not gonna lie. Like, throughout the entire playthrough, I took note of how pretty they looked, and I think they would actually make some pretty decent wallpapers or whatever. But everything else, Now, I wouldn't say these look bad, far from it, but I just don't think they really mesh well with the environment, if that makes sense. God, this is gonna sound so stupid to say, but it's like when you emulate a DS game that mixes 2D and 3D and you upscale it in an emulator, and like, sure, it looks a whole lot cleaner, but then something about it just looks wrong. And the same can also be said for the 2D animated cutscenes too. You get like 7 minutes of these throughout the entire game, and they look fine, but something about this anime-ass art style just doesn't work to me in 3D. That one cutscene on the train was pretty cool though, I'll give it that. And side note, seeing these cutscenes for the first time really threw me off, because when I was watching the show, I watched the early years of it, so imagine my surprise when these cutscenes didn't look like they were being shot in like Gary's mod. Actually, that's kinda too harsh to Gary's mod. Is VR Chat a better comparison? So I'm gonna be blunt again, this music in this game did nothing for me. When the tunes are unforgettable, the game uses these vocal tracks that feel like the worst of every vocal track from the Sonic games of the 2000s. And in theory, I should like it, but I don't know, man, this just doesn't hit. And that's not even mentioning the vocal track used like in the final boss, which is straight up just bad. That much autotune cannot be healthy. Yeah, this game was an absolute pile of nothing. I know that a good chunk of that probably comes from me just not being a fan of the source material, but even if you are a fan of it, I just don't think there's really anything here to keep you engaged. Maybe if you want to see the cutscenes or the characters or whatever, but at that point, just look it up on YouTube, man. If anything, this game gave me the heavy vibes of a licensed DS game, like the game that you have on a DS that you just play on a road trip because there's nothing better to do. Which is nice for the nostalgia, I guess, but like those games, there's nothing going for it. And even then, I'm sure I'd enjoy those more than whatever RWBY Arrowfell was, because, you know, at least like I know what those games are trying to be, because what the hell was this game trying to be?